Welcome to the Athlete Insights Podcast, hosted by Yash Pad Day, a podcast focused on letting athletes tell their journeys in their sport. This podcast is presented by Boxed Water. Boxed water is better.
Welcome into another episode of the Athlete Insights Podcast. Today I've got my guest, Sierra Lee. She's an operations assistant with NAU football. We're working with one of our mutual friends, Puneeth Sharma, who was at UNC with both of us when we were there. So, Sierra, I appreciate you coming on and chatting it up with me, and then talking about kind of your career, kind of where it's taken you and how and where you are today. So I appreciate you kind of coming on and spending some time with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I think this is so cool.
Yeah, no, it's the podcast is great, and I love it, and it's helped me and allowed me to interact with so many different people. UNC in general allowed me to interact with. I'd never been out to Colorado before in my life, and so never been out west in the western half of the U.S. in my life. So allowed me to meet some great people like yourself, and so starting back though, as I always do with my guest is.
Yeah.
When did you were into, you said off the air, you did a little communications when you were at UNC. You were the team photographer for UNC football, Northern Colorado football. For those of you that aren't from the Colorado area, UNC, I'll reference, is Northern Colorado, not North Carolina. Just to make that
Yeah.
make that distinction clear in that regard. But talk about kind of what's really first sparked your love of sport, and at what age did that really spark your love of sport?
Yeah, definitely. So I always laugh when people ask me this question because I go back to like being a kid playing sports, right? And I tell them, I was like, I did sports for maybe like 2, 3 years, and then that was it. I was like, I'm not going to be an athlete. This is not for me.
Gotcha.
This is not my environment whatsoever. So like, I laugh when people ask because they're like, you're so involved. Like, were you playing sports since you were a kid? I'm like, not really, to be honest.
Mhm.
I had siblings growing up though, and they were big sports. They were big in the athletics, and I was always the one on the sidelines watching. And I think being a sibling, especially being the youngest, I was always watching, and I think that's kind of where my love of behind the scenes in sports kind of started. Was back when I was watching my siblings play. They both played soccer. Uh,
Mhm.
they both played through the high school level. My brother ended up going and playing at Ottawa University
Ooh.
in college, and so I got so used to being around sports all the time,
Mhm.
and that really just kind of was like, I wanted to know more, but not about the sport itself. I wanted to know about like who was putting these on, like what
Oh,
goes into this, like
gotcha.
who's taking these pictures, who's doing these stats. Like I wanted to know that aspect of it versus being an actual athlete it's myself.
The business side of
Yeah.
sport, in that role. And you said you played sport for 2 to 3 years early on. What sport, if I may ask, what kind of sports?
Yeah, so like I said, my siblings all played soccer, so of course I was a soccer kid.
Okay.
Learned really quickly I did not like it.
Mhm.
I went and played softball for a little bit, didn't
Gotcha.
like it either, so I was like, I'm done.
I got you. I got you. And then you said that's really watching your siblings really sparked your transition from playing sport to really getting behind the scenes. Did you, what was your, if I may ask, like I asked what earliest memory playing sport, what
Yeah.
was your kind of earliest memory of, like, I know you said you really got into the photography, videography, stats and stuff. When did that transition? What was your earliest memory of how that transition happened from
Oh
playing?
God. Okay, so in my family we have a close uncle who um was our high school football coach,
Okay.
and he was probably the high school coach for about 17 years.
Oh, wow.
And he was kind of giving the reins to a newer coach coming in. And so I started, it was around the time I was going to be a freshman in high school.
Gotcha.
And so, of course, I'm not going to be able to work for my uncle, unfortunately. But I was like, oh, I love this coach. Like, he's a good guy. I was like, let me help you out. Like
I
I want
gotcha.
to be involved, but not
Mhm.
necessarily as an athlete. So I got involved with football equipment. That was like the first thing I did.
Okay.
And I always like, I think it's so funny because my varsity letter, I got my freshman year in football.
Oh.
I sit back and laugh sometimes. So I'm like, it's so random, but like
Yeah.
I take pride in it.
Oh yeah. Oh,
um,
as you should.
yeah, especially because that coach at the time was unsure whether or not he even wanted to have a female student manager. And that like that was an issue for a little bit there, but eventually, he was like, okay, I'm like happy to take you on. You've proven well, like you got this. So lots of times sitting at the front of the bus.
Yeah.
um, and he ended up taking over and being our head coach for the basketball team as well.
Oh,
He only did football for the 1 year, but then he ended up taking over for the basketball team, and I went with him in that as well.
okay.
And he ended up coaching all 4 years. So I did all 4 years of basketball student managing with him as well.
Gotcha. That's cool. That's cool. So you started off, and you've got a variety of experiences. Because when I you at UNC, you were doing more of the photography and videography.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah.
always
So
great to, like I always tell people, like just put yourself out there. You never know what's going to happen, and that's, you've done that very well in terms of, connecting and doing that. But you were talking about how did the photography, videography, and that stuff come about? If you could talk about that for a little bit.
yeah, I think I always just kind of liked having a camera and taking pictures. That was just kind of my biggest thing.
Yep.
Um, but the thing that so my older sister is also a photographer, so I
Okay.
watched her take sports photography as well and do athlete photos at the high school level. So I
Yeah.
had some background in it going into college. It wasn't like fully something I'd fully learned.
Hmm.
But in being in college, so originally I went to UNC to be a teacher, actually.
Okay.
Fun fact, I realized very quickly that I like sports. I did not want to be a teacher.
Yeah.
So then I quickly changed my major to sport administration.
Gotcha.
And I think the thing for me was like, I didn't even know that could be a career. Like,
Mm.
I don't know why, like being a manager, I went to practice every single day, I went to games every single day. And it never occurred to me that was something that I enjoyed or wanted to have as a future career path.
Yeah.
And that was the thing too, is like having my sister be in sports photography, me being a videographer for the basketball team at the time,
Yeah.
doing film highlights, etc., for recruiting and whatnot.
Yeah.
By the time I got to college, I was like, why didn't I want to make a career out of this?
Yeah.
Like, this is what I love. I'm committed to it.
Hmm.
And so I think the kind of the photography aspect fell into that was once I changed my major, it was like, okay, now sport admin is such a big, broad thing. Like I can do so many things with that.
Yeah.
And so one of them was like communications was something I like immediately fell in love with. And I was like, oh, like I'm good at taking photos. Like I've had video background. Like I can do that. And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of where that whole process started. And so
Mhm.
how I got on to be working with UNC football was I was taking a sports photography class,
Oh.
and I had reached out to our communications director at the time, Ryan Pfeiffer,
Yeah.
and I was like, "Hey, like, I'm trying to build my portfolio. I'm in this class. Like, I'm trying to learn. Like, can I just come take out pictures for practice?"
Yeah.
And he was like, "Oh yeah, for sure. Like, come in, take a practice photo. Like, I'll help you get set up." And that ended up turning into a whole internship long thing. I got signed on with basketball right after that. So that really kind of
Wow.
started everything was just already being exposed to it a little bit from my siblings and just knowing what I wanted for a career at that point. But
Hmm.
what really steered that was having that class and then having that network with Ryan as well.
Gotcha. And you hit the key points on the nail there at the end. Networking, right?
Yeah.
Networking is important, especially in any field, but in sport management,
Oh
especially.
yeah.
It's important to connect. And like I said, going back to putting yourself out there, that putting yourself out there and really being able to connect with individuals has been great. Now, like I mentioned earlier, you're working with our mutual friend, Puneet Sharma down at
Yeah.
Northern Arizona University in football operations. Can you talk about that transition from UNC working in videography and photography to now? I know you were mentioning off the air that, maybe operations now is something that you would want to pursue in the future. Can you talk about that transition?
Yeah, so I'm in my classes, like obviously we kind of go over the different career paths you can have with a sport
Mhm.
management degree. And so, you kind of dabble a little bit into like every topic, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and so obviously having our mutual friend Puneeth, when I saw he got a job at NAU, I was like, hey, I'm moving back to my hometown too.
Yeah.
Like again, networking. This is where networking is like so key to my career, and I've learned how important it is.
Yeah.
Is I just reached out to him. I was like, hey, like I saw you're in Flagstaff. And it's one of those things, like, again, I had just reached out to kind of see, like, hey, like, could I shadow you for one day kind of thing? Like, I just want to see, like, what your job's like, because especially being an online student now, like, I don't get as much exposure as I would being in person.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of something I wanted to, like, see was the operations side, and especially having him be the director of operations. I was like, hey, like, I saw you moved up in roles. Like, I met you when you were an assistant.
Yeah.
um, and so he invited me out, and then we ended up turning it into a semester long thing. Now it's my internship for school.
Oh,
So it's one of those things, again, like with Ryan, I had just reached out for probably like the bare minimum
yeah.
task, and it just turned into something more. And like something like Beneath and I had discussed very early on is that, like, he wasn't necessarily looking for an intern, but he knew me, he knew my work ethic, and was very happy to, like, have me on to work under him and learn from him. And I'm like so grateful for him for that. But that's like where I think my networking really showed. And I was like, he was just an assistant operations dude when I met him. Like, I was
Mhm.
just a team photographer, and here we are working together to benefit our program.
Yeah, for sure, and benefit a team from your hometown,
Yeah,
in
exactly.
Flagstaff. So that's great. And you were talking about how you initially had reached out to shadow him for a day to kind of understand kind of how day-to-day operations work. Now that you've kind of integrated yourself into that role as well, can you talk about your day-to-day, what that entails? And I know you were mentioning you guys are preparing to go back up to Greeley this week to face UNC, but kind of talk me through like day to day during the season, what that entails.
Yeah, so I did not realize how much Puneeth was doing. Let me tell you,
Uh-huh.
uh, he is a very busy dude.
Gotcha.
And so going on with him and just working under him, um, it's great. I absolutely love it. He's a great mentor. Kind of our day to day is a lot of we work in the finances of the football program. We work in the schedules and travels. So we're the ones booking the hotels, getting the rental cars, flights,
Mhm.
getting food orders in, catering, and then
Got
handling all the receipts that go with the program. And like something really important that he kind of reiterated was like, you take care of the coach so that the coach doesn't have to do all this stuff.
Mhm.
Like he doesn't want to have to worry about if the team flight is going to get there on time. Like he doesn't have to worry about if we have the right amount of hotel rooms. Like that falls on us and our responsibilities.
Yeah.
So my day to day kind of varies a little bit, but roughly it's just filing receipts, getting travel stuff ready.
Gotcha.
Obviously we're away this week, so it's kind of setting up. We're making schedules, getting our itinerary ready for the week,
Hmm.
making our hotels ready, rental cars ready.
Gotcha.
Just
And do
kind of
you
the day to
guys
day.
stay in hotels for home games as well?
We don't, but they go to the hotel in the morning and kind of start there.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
because it's close by. The guys just sleeping around.
Yep. No, I got you. Yeah, because I just from my own experience working in football video when I was at Ball State, even for home games, we used to go to like the hotel in Muncie and stay there for the night. And
Yeah,
that's why I figured I would ask that uh
yeah,
him as well. But no, that's cool to kind of see. It's always interesting to kind of see the day-to-day operations in that regard. And before every podcast before we close, I always ask, right, what's the best piece of advice? So I'll throw that to you. What's the best piece of advice throughout? You've had so many varied experiences. What's the best piece of advice that you've gotten throughout those experiences that you've
oh
had?
gosh. I'd say the best piece of advice was just like, if everyone tells you no, like, just keep going.
Yeah.
Um, I think for me that was the biggest thing, is like, especially being a woman in sports, like it's not unheard of, but taking over a male dominated career path, it's not
Mhm.
always right away. um, and so sometimes you get rejected here and there. And you just keep going, you just keep applying to things. I
Yeah.
can't tell you how many internships I'd applied for, not realizing that I was gonna end up interning in my hometown team with someone I knew.
Yeah.
So just the
It's crazy
opportunities
how
will
the
present
world
itself.
works. You
Yeah,
know.
like the opportunities will present itself. Just keep being persistent, keep just building your resume, doing what you can. My resume's everywhere. Sports, I have so many different backgrounds and things now. And I just say, like, when people tell you no, like, just go prove them wrong. I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing. If I look back to high school, like I didn't even think I was gonna work in sports. Like I said, I thought I was gonna be a teacher.
Yeah.
And so many people were like, thought it was just a fever dream, like it was just a hobby for me. And now I'm like, well, now I'm on the hometown team on the sideline. So like, I mean, we upgrade.
Everything comes full circle, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, and
Uh,
and that's kind of what my follow up would be on that is, I want you to kind of picture, and I started this podcast as a way as for me to use my platform and for my
yeah.
guests to kind of help provide a source of inspiration, help young people, because it's all about, as we get older, as we grow into our professions, it's all about how can we give back? How can we help?
Yeah.
You're at your hometown team, you're helping your hometown team. How can you give back to your hometown and give back to the young people within that town? And so I want to ask you is, and what I want to, the way I phrase it is, I want you to imagine that you're talking to young women who want to get to the level and the position that you are. What's one key skill or one piece of advice you'd give young women to get to that point? And I know you mentioned, not taking no for an answer and moving that, but what's one skill or another piece of advice that you provide to young?
Yeah, definitely. I think a piece of advice I would give is to start networking early. Having known that, like, obviously going into this, I didn't know this was going to be my career path.
Yeah.
Um, but networking, even just being a student manager, like I was already exposed to the sport industry so early on. And
Yeah.
even just watching my siblings play, like just kind of having those relationships, my high school coach who I had worked for ended up writing my recommendation letter that kind of started off
Mhm.
everything that started at UNC. And then I started learning coaches there. They started becoming recommendation letters.
Mhm.
I'm still in good contacts with all of them at UNC. So I still call them up sometimes. I'm like, hey, I'm doing this for school. I could ask, like, use asking a question. I have this application going in. I'd love to have a recommendation letter, especially as I'm getting ready to kind of go that grad school path now. I
Yeah.
want to kind of go back to those networks and people that I've met along the way.
Yeah.
Not just like coaches either, like students in my class were also in this career field. Like I could be sitting next to someone who's going to be an athletic director one day, or someone who's going to be like working in communications with another professional team later on. So I want to like keep close contact with those people. So I think networking early on, and just like really getting involved. I've noticed that like more and more teams recently kind of have like people come shadow if you're in high school, or like you could kind of apply for like summer internships and things and whatnot. And so like just get involved. Like I've even had people reach out and like, how'd you get in photography? Like I want to do what you do.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, like come with me one day. Like I'll go over it with you.
Yeah.
And just kind of saying yes to those opportunities really kind of sets you up for what you want in your career path. Like I said, I did not imagine coming back to the hometown team,
Yeah.
working with our mutual friend here, Puneeth. It's just an opportunity I saw and I took it. And I just, yeah, if I didn't know him, I don't think I'd be with him, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's all about, seizing the opportunity and,
mhm.
it's, and you never know where life's going to take you. You never
Yeah,
know things going to come full circle, and I'm glad it has for your end, and that was great. Advice is just keep network early,
yeah,
network often, and that's great to kind of see that. So, well, that's all the time we have for this episode of the Athlete Insights podcast. Sierra, I want to thank you. I know it's a later night, but I want to thank you. For spending the time, and I know you probably, I'm assuming you came from practice before this as
yeah,
well. Yeah. So appreciate you taking the time, and
yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
and appreciate you. And I'll have your social media stuff on the video. I'll have it on the description for YouTube. It'll also be on Spotify's description and things of that nature. And so we'll have your social media handle so you can follow our viewers and our listeners can follow you and your journey this season and seasons beyond, and your career as well. And then you can follow my podcast on YouTube, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, pretty much everywhere you get a podcast, find this one. So appreciate you taking the time and spend that time with me. But we'll see you next time.